know if you caught the words on the end of that last stanza, but it says, unto your mission be true. And having a mission in life, a purpose, is what we've been talking about, and direction, and seeking to accomplish something with it. I remember when I was in Bible college, they asked us at one point, I can't remember what year it was, but to sit down and kind of write out your life purpose. What is your purpose? What are you here for? What are you trying to accomplish? And trying to have that perspective of a mission or a direction that your life is trying to go. Now, we all know in many ways that starts broad, right? And maybe even as simple as I want to glorify God with my life. Might be even that broad. But at some point, it's going to become narrower as God specifically leads you. But it's good to sit down and ask, what is my purpose? What is my mission? What is my direction? Because the goals that we make and the things that we endeavor to accomplish are going to be driven out or come out of that life personal purpose and that life personal mission. And I want us to recognize that because that's what we've been looking at. We've been looking at a king who started young, but a king who had a mission. He had a purpose. He had a drive and a direction. He wanted to accomplish something with his life, and by God's grace, he did. And I think it's all good for us to remember that when it comes to life, right, it takes a lot more courage to live life with purpose than it takes to live life just waiting to see what will happen. If you have purpose, if you have mission, then there's always the possibility of failure, right? There's always the possibility of, I might set a goal and I might not meet a goal. But if you just take life as it comes, if you just kind of say, well, whatever will be, que sera, sera, as the expression goes, you're going to find out that sometimes it doesn't take a lot of courage to live that life. And we need to, of course, come to God every day for God's direction and for God's grace to get through what we face. But it is important to live life with purpose. And so we're in 2 Chronicles 24. I'm just going to read a few verses to kind of remind ourselves as to where we're at and what we are trying to see in this passage and what we're trying to draw out. And of course, we're challenging each other individually. What is your purpose? What is your mission? What does God have for you to accomplish with your life? Maybe we'll read a couple verses here, and then I'm just going to maybe ask the question, maybe in some general perspectives, what are some good life purposes? I want you to think about that for a minute. What are some good life missions, both generally and maybe specifically, that we can kind of consider as we set out looking at this lesson together again tonight? So 2 Chronicles 24 and verse number 4. And it came to pass after this that Joash was minded to repair the house of the Lord. All right, after this, of course, is recognizing the history of his life. Remember Athaliah, his grandmother, Ahaziah, of course, his dad, both of which left him a great history of people who did not please or honor God. And he kind of came up on the heels of that, but he has a mission, he has a mind, a direction, a purpose to repair God's house. And then you can see verse number 6, if you jump down there with me. And the king called for Jehoiada, the chief, and said unto him, Why hast thou not required of the Levites to bring in out of Judah and out of Jerusalem the collection, according to the commandment of Moses, the servant of the Lord, and of the congregation of Israel for the tabernacle of witness? For the sons of Athaliah, that wicked woman, had broken up the house of God, and also all the dedicated things of the house of the Lord did they bestow upon Baalim. And at the king's commandment they made a chest, and set it without at the gate of the house of the Lord. All right, let's pray. Ask God to help us tonight. Father, help us to see the importance of living life with courageous purpose. And I pray, Lord, that you'd help each one of our lives individually and, Lord, also collectively to both think of general purposes and also specific purposes to which we must apply our lives. And Lord, I pray that you'd help us to make our daily decisions and our daily choices as we recognize those biblical purposes. Help us tonight as we look at this together. In Jesus' wonderful name, amen. All right, so let's talk just for a minute as we get started. What are some good life, maybe general or specific purposes that it's a good foundation when you're looking at, hey, this is what I want to get done. This is what I want to accomplish in the time that I have. What are some good things to consider, maybe generally or specifically? I'll give you either. All right, Mondo, give it a try.
Police, fireman, nurse, pastor.
Okay, you're talking maybe vocations. Okay, yeah, choosing your vocation in line with what purpose? Maybe a vocation that's going to, maybe be helpful for others, maybe be effective in that way. All right, what else? But generally, I gave you one. All right, I want to glorify God with my life. That's about as broad as you can get. Okay? What are maybe some other general ones, general purposes to which to live our lives? All right, Brother Doug?
Spreading the word to the lost.
All right, getting the gospel to others. Absolutely. Well, we want to have that as a general purpose. Tom?
Discipling people who are already saved.
All right, discipling people, helping others spiritually, giving other people spiritual direction. All right, Boaz?
If there's girls on a party, you should let them go first.
That's good. Putting other people before yourself,
Amen.
especially the girls. That's good. Somebody's training well. Yes?
Be kind to people even if they're not kind to you.
All right, to treat others right, and even when they don't treat you right. All right, these are good general purposes.
Now we're stepping on toes.
Now we're stepping on toes, really. I'm not the one preaching yet, Brother Doug, right? So what else are good general purposes? Yes, Tom.
I heard this one the other night. I'm not sure how well it fits. I might be just trying to jam something.
Okay, just because you liked it.
To lead without being a tyrant and to serve without being a slave.
That's good. That's good. Good reminders. Good general purposes. Franklin.
Give up an addiction or a bad habit.
All right. Yeah. Lead a life of change. Giving up bad habits, bad addictions. Yes. Good general purposes. I want my life. We talk even about sanctification. I want God to change my life for the better. I want God to change me. All right. Anything else? These are good general purposes. Chris.
Raise a family that glorifies God.
All right. Raise a family that glorifies God. Have my home and whatever home God gives me to properly be directed towards Him. That's good. Good general purposes. Anybody else? I thought I saw another flicker of a hand somewhere, but that might have been it. All right, but this is good. Why? Why? Because if we don't have the right general purposes, we're not going to make the right specific decisions. And we all know most of these, at least intellectually, are good life purposes. But of course, we also know that many people live life with many different purposes. Many people live life just, I want to have fun. I mean, that's about as maybe heavy as it is for some people. Some people are like, I just want to have a good time. Some people just very, basically just say, I want to be rich. I want to have big wealth, and sometimes people have all kinds of different purposes. Now, why does that matter? Because your life decisions in some way are going to flow out of the inner purposes that God puts on your heart, hopefully, right? And so developing as a person, they're saying, hey, this is the purpose of my life, and Joash had a very clear one. And I think very foundationally, he wanted to honor God with his life when others had not honored God. And from that general purpose came a specific direction. Well, because of that, I'm going to use my role, my opportunity as king to make sure God's house is rebuilt. And from those general purposes, yes, you may choose a vocation and through that vocation say, in this vocation, I want to honor God in this way. All right? And making sure that that general purpose is there so that right, good, profitable life decisions are made. And so we talked about so far, we've been talking about the mind, the willing mind that Joash had, because it's got to start there. It's got to start there. The decisions you make, the drive of your life, will start with what goes on where nobody sees. What do you want? What do you want to do? What is your purpose? Do you have that inner drive that God has established and built in your life? And then we started, secondly, you have to have a plan. It has to in some way come out in a workable, functional plan. And we just started last time talking about that it has to have some determination, but then we're going to just want to understand here a little bit with that determination comes the necessity of having a method that is functional. Now, what's interesting is look at verse number 8, and if you have your Bible there with me, just look there with me for a moment. It says, and at the king's commandment, they made a chest and set it without at the gate of the house of the Lord. Now, from everything we can see, all right, historically, this is a new way of doing things. It comes to pass, it happens because of the king's commandment. A very famous commentator, most of you know, Matthew Henry, had this to say about this. He said, the throwing of money into a chest through a hole in the lid of it was a way that had not been used before. And perhaps the very novelty of the thing made it a successful expedient for the raising of money. All right, so if he's right, according to what we can understand historically and see in this passage, because the king was the one that commanded this chest to be built, when people are coming in to the temple, there is a chest that is sitting there that is specifically for the fundraising for this project. And from what I understand, people are going to have to walk by it, right? People are going to have to make a decision as to whether or not to contribute. It's going to be something that is visual, something that is obvious, and the hole in the lid, from what I can understand, is something that hadn't been done before. It's a new plan, it's a different plan, but it was a workable plan. Now, this is an interesting thing to me because for some people, everything new is great, and for some people, everything new is bad. For others, sometimes everything old is great, and for others, everything old is bad. And here for Joash, he does something new that's not wrong, something new, but is different. But originally, it is something that probably has not been seen before. And although we don't want to change things for change's sake, we want to evaluate everything as it's being done as to whether or not it can effectively accomplish the purpose in line with God's direction and godly principles. I'm going to flip over to Proverbs 24, because I think there's an important balance when it comes to change that we want to recognize scripturally. Change is necessary in order for things to move forward. Okay, Joash couldn't say, well, the way things are being done or the way we should just keep doing things. All right, if he would have done it that way, they might never have raised the funds that were necessary. He recognized that what he was doing, at first he said, hey, let's get the Levites to go and raise the funds. And he tried to talk to the Levites. You know what the Levites did? Nothing. You know how much the fundraising went up? From what we can see, 0. And then Joash is like, all right, this isn't working. My purpose, my drive is still to see this project accomplished, but I'm going to have to do it a little bit differently. And so he's willing to do it differently. He does it differently. And the second way is successful. Proverbs 24 and verse 21, my son, fear the Lord and the king. And that's important where it starts. A godly fear of God. We want to do things to please the Lord. And in this context, we also want to make sure things are in line with authority, the king. And it says, and meddle not with them that are given to change. All right? Some people like change just for change's sake. That's not necessarily the right thing. That's not necessarily a good thing. Change is not always good, and change is not always bad. But at times when something is not functional, when it's not working, sometimes you need to take a step back and say, in line with the fear of God and a respect and honoring of godly principles, what can be done to make this project move forward more effectively? And it's interesting as you look at what Joash did, of course, the benefit that change made to the project he was trying to accomplish. It would have been easy, and sometimes we try things, I think we're all like this. We sometimes try things, and at first we're met with opposition or failure, and we just kind of go, oh, didn't work. I failed, I flunked. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what possible solution there is. But Joash, because he had a mind that wanted to see this project accomplished, he drove forward to try and find another way to do what God had put on his heart. I don't know if this is in your notes, it's in mine. It says this, if you really want to do something, you'll find a way. If you don't, you'll find an excuse. Ever heard that before? Let me read it again. If you really want to do something, you'll find a way. If you don't, you'll find an excuse. Haven't we all been there before? Somebody's like, oh, it's too hard to witness to people. Just not going to do it. All right? It's too hard to give. I'm not going to do it. It's too hard to serve. I'm not going to do it. And sadly, unless our life is filled with a godly purpose that says, I want to find a way, sometimes we will find an excuse instead of finding a solution. But here's Joash with what I believe was a godly drive, a godly desire that said, all right, talking to the Levites didn't work, at least to start. I need to go at this a different way. So it was a determined plan. He pushed through obstacles and challenges, found a way, a unique solution to get this project done. Second thing, it was a determined plan, but it was also a deployed plan. It was a deployed plan. It was a plan that was put into action. And look with me here in these verse number 9. It says, and they made a proclamation throughout Judah and Jerusalem to bring into the Lord the collection that Moses, the servant of God, laid upon Israel in the wilderness. And all the princes and the people rejoiced and brought in. All right, think about this with me just for a minute. What are some of the reasons for what we've talked about maybe over the last couple of weeks that this method seems to start finding some traction when maybe the other one didn't? You have any thoughts? Why is it that now it seems like, okay, now the proclamation is made. Now things start moving. You see any differences maybe in this passage? I'm not looking for anything in specific. I just want you to think through it for a minute. Because it's interesting to notice that the first time he tried, it was met with seemingly failure at first in leadership, but then it seems now things start moving forward. Anybody think of anything? Question too hard? All right, Monda's going to give it a try. Appreciate it.
A fresh look at things.
All right, it's a fresh look. And I think there are times when you're working, and I know in leadership, when you try something and it fails, sometimes to continually beat what we'll call a dead horse is the expression, right? Sometimes it's hard to get people motivated behind the same thing. And sometimes just switching things up a little bit can help build momentum and direction and enthusiasm behind the same project, slightly going after a different way. All right, yes?
I missed last week, but reading the passage, the priests when they went out didn't have faith. They didn't hasten to it. They didn't have faith. But when they put out the chest, I take it as an act of faith. And God tells us when we pray to Him, we should pray as if He's already answered.
Good. All right, there seems to be a change of heart with the priest that's there. They're like, hey, let's get behind this. This thing is moving forward. We can see it moving forward. And they jump on board. Great. Anybody else? These are good.
I'm a little bit confused. Who put out the chest? Like who's it?
Let's look. It says, and at the king's commandment, they made a chest. I would guess the they is the Levites.
Okay, but it's
That would be my assumption from reading that passage.
But it's still the king giving them a specific task that was doable and could be completed in a short period of time.
Okay.
That could be successful with.
Okay. That's good. I think there is a recognition that at that point something is moving forward, right? In some ways the project is moving forward. And they're even personally involved in seeing that project move forward. Interesting. I didn't consider that. But in many ways I've seen that sometimes before, even when it comes to, let's talk about this project, for example. When someone says, hey, we're going to fix the temple, everyone goes, you know what the budget for that is going to be? You know how much that's going to cost? You know how large of a task that is to accomplish? And sometimes people are very intimidated by the size of the task. But then once people see, hey, this thing is going to move forward, we are going to do something, this is moving in a direction, then people are more likely, by human nature even, to sometimes get on board. But it is interesting to see the faith of the Levites and being willing to get involved. And it seems there in verse 9 again, and they made a proclamation through Judah and Jerusalem. They seemed unwilling to make the proclamation before, but now the Levites are willing to make that same proclamation that the king had already asked for. And then all of a sudden this thing starts to build momentum. All of a sudden it seems like as the Levites get excited about the project together, they're able to move this thing forward. But I think it's important that we recognize that there was cooperation and action with the project. And there is something about when people are willing to get behind something that is supposed to be done that can help others move the project forward. I'll read a couple verses. Actually, let's just go to Exodus 30:16. It should be there in your notes there tonight if you have that with you. It says, "And thou shalt take the atonement money of the children of Israel, and shalt appoint for the service of the tabernacle of the congregation, that it may be a memorial unto the children of Israel before the Lord, to make an atonement for your souls." I'm just reading that verse because these people would have known back in biblical history that the giving of money to the temple to accomplish this purpose was already commanded, was already laid out. However, it took the encouragement, it seems, of many people saying, hey, let's get this done together, people getting on board to help people do what they were already supposed to do. And sadly, or sometimes to our benefit and also to our challenge, people can be motivated by the actions of others. And it's so important that any plan is a plan that is acted on. I've said to many people as we've talked at different times about church leadership, I said, I'd rather everyone get involved in the second best plan than half of our people get involved in the best plan. Because the truth is, when everyone gets on board together, that's when things move forward. And so what I'm trying to communicate is that any plan, although I don't see, honestly, massive difference between plan number 1 and plan number 2. Both of them are, hey, let's raise money to accomplish God's purpose in fixing the building. Both of them involved, hey, Levites, let's get out there and let's tell people and encourage people to be involved in giving. The only minor change that I can see from these verses through is a change in the attitude of the priests, their willingness to get involved, and a chest that was set out with a hole in it. But the difference really began to build as people got excited about putting into practice what had been encouraged. The best plan in the world does not accomplish anything unless it is put into practice. Some will recognize the name General George Patton. He is known for saying the statement. He said, "A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week." Okay? A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week. What does that mean? Sometimes you do have to do something. And if people will do something, it can help and encourage a direction of change. And that momentum building with these people helped encourage other people to get involved. Once the Levites were willing to do what had been challenged them to do, once they are willing to push forward in faith, once they are willing to build this chest and put it at the gate, it seems that things begin to go. And it's so important that we recognize that plans do need human activity. They do need our personal, individual involvement. Because as we are involved, it encourages others to do the same. Let's just take a moment here. We'll take a look at number 3, what is necessary. And I'll try and get through here quickly the end of this lesson. What does this result in? Number 3 is a wonderful provision. A wonderful provision. Now, we've hinted at this, but you really see, as you look at this passage, you see this need and excitement being met. Look at verse number 10. "And all the princes and all the people rejoiced and brought in and cast into the chest until they had made an end. Now it came to pass that at what time the chest was brought into the king's office by the hand of the Levites, and when they saw that there was much money, the king's scribe and the high priest's officer came and emptied the chest and took it and carried it to his place again. And thus they did day by day and gathered money in abundance." Here, your next note there, the need was met by God's people. When the people got involved, the need was taken care of. And I'm sure to great excitement of those not only in leadership, but you see as well, also great excitement to those who were involved. They were excited to see this project moving forward and excited to be part of what God was doing. God was taking care of the needs as everyone was doing their part. And there is great power and there is great encouragement when everyone will do something. Ephesians 4 and verse 16, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. God places great emphasis on everybody doing something within his body, within the church. And the emphasis we see in Scripture and the power we see in this passage leads us to that wonderful conclusion that when everyone does something, amazing things can happen. And this project is completed with widespread involvement of God's people. Let her be there. Their work was finished. The work was finished. Verse 12, and the king and Jehoiada gave it to such as did the work of the service of the house of the Lord, and hired masons and carpenters to repair the house of the Lord, and also such as wrought iron and brass to mend the house of the Lord. So the workmen wrought, and the work was perfected by them, and they set the house of God in his state, and strengthened it. And now I want you to notice that, because the project was not completed with fundraising. That was not the conclusion. That was not the end of what needed to be done. That was just a means to an end. And here much of the Bible reminds us that once the funds were raised, then the work needed to be accomplished. The finish line might have been in sight, but then organization had to happen. People had to be hired. People had to do the work. Carpenters had to be brought in. Masons had to be brought in. And I know from experience that takes organization and involvement and so many different facets. And so thankful when God provides the funds, but at the same time, then the work begins. Then the involvement of those necessary to do the work are brought in and used to accomplish that work. But notice verse 14, and when they had finished it, they brought the rest of the money before the king and Jehoiada. There's the high priest, whoever made vessels for the house of the Lord, even vessels to minister and to offer withal, and spoons and vessels of gold and silver. And they offered burnt offerings in the house of the Lord continually all the days of Jehoiada. They were able to see the work completed, and it even goes on to say, and God's worship within the temple continued all the days that Jehoiada was alive. It is trying to present the wonderful conclusion of a man that had a purpose to accomplish something, had a drive to see it come across the finish line, and then the wonderful participation of all of God's people to see that project completed. And the Bible is trying to outline for us what God did for Israel when there was a drive to see something good done. And it reminds us of what? What is the general principle that we're trying to understand from these lessons? We're trying to understand it is very easy to coast through life. It is very easy sometimes to not have godly ambition, but it does take courage to say, hey, I have purpose before God. My life matters. There is something that God wants me to do, and I want to accomplish, understand with God what that general purpose is. So as we mentioned, I want to glorify God with my life. I want to see people come to Christ. I want to help others around me. But then specifically, that's going to be narrowed at times to individual tasks. For me, yes, it's going to be, all right, God has my life to be in vocational ministry, all right? And that means even past that, broken up into individual tasks. But for every person in this room, that's going to mean, okay, God has a place for me to serve. God has a place for me to give. God has a way for me to be involved. God has something specific that I want to accomplish in my life. And I don't want to sit back as a person and just merely wait for life to come. There's some things about the future I can't control and you can't control. I don't know what life is going to be, but I don't want to just sit and wait. I want to, with God's help, say, God, I want to do something for you. And God can lead and direct that kind of heart to specific things Or maybe sometimes not only us, maybe even others get involved with that purpose, and God is able, with your life, to accomplish something that matters and has significance. And I'm so thankful as I look at this passage for all that God did. I look at this passage and I recognize that it was not simple, it was not straightforward, it had its challenges, that some would have faltered and maybe even failed at sometimes the first moment of failure. But how God was able to see widespread involvement to see this accomplished. And can I encourage you, it's easy to coast in life. It's easy to hit different times in life where we just kind of say, well, whatever will be, will be. And we need to trust God for the future. I'm not saying we don't need to lean on God's grace. I'm not saying we can, as people, predict and plan and make everything happen for a future. No, that is ultimately up to the Lord. However, we do need to be people that have a desire to accomplish and finish what God has put us on earth for. Reminded of the words of Christ, John chapter 17, he said this, I have glorified thee on the earth. I have finished the work which thou gavest me to do. I hope you, at the end of your life, will be able to say the same. I hope me, at the end of my life, will be able to say the same. God, I've glorified you. I finished the work that you gave me to do. We must have a godly ambition to have courage to plan for the future.